I'm Reverend Lance from First Congregational United Church of Christ in Alpena, Michigan, and you're here with a forum on Brian McLaren's chapter 29 of We Make the Road by Walking. Today I preached on that particular chapter. We have with us here the Reverend Ginny Titus. She's been a minister in the United Church for 20 years, the last 10 of which she was the pastor of the Atlanta Congregational United Church of Christ, Atlanta, Michigan, that is. And then also with us is Lee Copeland, a member of this church, very active, very well read Christian, who's also moving toward Buddhism and other interesting spiritualities. Comes to us with some Calvinist background, some Reformed tradition background, and has been a challenging conversation partner for the last few years here at the church. I'm grateful to have you here, Lee and Ginny. The topic, as Brian McLaren talks about it, is that we have a secret life, the life that we live in secret. That's his personal choice of words. As I read the chapter, I was struck that it's really the difference between practicing our piety in public to be seen by others and how we practice that same spiritual discipline or piety in private. So to me, it's a private-public issue. For him, it's a matter of you have a secret life that is not necessarily shown or could even be transported into that larger world. Because once we start to project our spiritual devotion, our spiritual, whatever we want to do, it falls artificial. I showed with the children today in church my William Shakespeare t-shirt. My William Shakespeare t-shirt is very simple. There's William, and in front of him he's holding a mask, which is the way a lot of theater used to be done. You'd have a mask to indicate that you're a woman, mask to indicate that you're a child or that you're the king, rather than having the costuming and things we do today. So the reason I brought that is Jesus in his text talks about the hypocrite, the one who is one way on the inside and presents a different mask to the exterior. And it was a theater term. Greek theater used this type of work as well. So the hippo being the outside, and the crete is your face. So the outside face that you present to the world is what he's critiquing. Is your inner prayer life, is your inner fasting, is your inner sense of giving alms to the poor, supporting charity, is that done because it's who you are, your secret life, or is it something you're doing because others will see it and judge you and then put you in a certain position or on a certain pedestal because of it? So that's the challenge, the problem of both having spiritual disciplines like prayer and fasting and giving alms. And the other is having it yourself. How do you show that to the public and for what motive? So that's really what the chapter was dealing with in detail. You've all read it. You've heard my sermon today. So the first thing I'll just ask, and either one of you can be the one to speak first, one thought or idea from this chapter, that particularly intrigued you or provoked you, or just like something leapt off the page and you want to address it. Lee.
It catches me right away, like in your sermon, the idea that visibility per se is a problem. I struggle with that. I'm thinking that there's something beneath that's an outer symbol in some situations, but not others, of a deeper problem. So I've been spending the time since the sermon figuring out what that deeper problem he means to teach, using the outer symptom as a way to kind of bring it up and get us thinking about it. But I don't think visibility per se of the good things we do could possibly be the problem.
So it's not the fact that people are seeing us do good works. Earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, let your light shine before others.
I was going to say that.
Okay, go ahead, say that.
No, that's it. There are places where visibility is all the point, and don't hide it, and you can't. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think the issue for me was the authenticity. The word that comes to mind is integrity. Is the person that is being seen in public doing the good deeds, leading the worship service, whatever that may be, is that person truly the person inside? So that secret life, that personal, is this really your devotion, or do you put it on as part of a program with a script?
Or because you think you have to.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, I think, practice faith. They come here as they might go to a meeting of the Chamber of Commerce or the Lions Club or anything else. because it's a habit, a pattern. Your family went here, all kinds of reasons, and I think he asked the same question in a different way. I thought personally it was his weakest chapter so far. I thought that I agree with Lee, that there are times when you need to tell someone, I've been praying for you, so that they feel supported. And what other examples can you think of that would be a good reason to share your faith journey? I mean, I think it's sharing your faith journey for some of it. But I think some people just come here because it's expected.
Your phrase, though, to tell someone that you're praying for them is intended to connect your two spirits, to let them know they've got support, invisible support that they may not have known about, and that should put them one step closer to feeling affirmed and loved and known and cared about. So the motive for doing that, I think, had those motives. The motive is, I think, what Jesus is talking about here is don't say your prayers, long prayers, on the street corner, just when the bell tolls. Oh, I happen to be downtown, and then I say my prayer for everyone to hear.
Well, that's how he was witnessing it too. The people that were leading the synagogue at the time would stand on the corners, and they still do. They'll go in front of the Wailing Wall, and that's a very open. Here I am praying, and they do a lot of prayers in front of there outwardly, and that's what he was against.
So doing those prayers out on the street corners, in the marketplaces, instead of to go in your room, close the door, and now have your prayer. And when you do, God already knows what you need, but put them into words, and here's the simple matter. That's one thing that was also in this chapter, was his fourfold approach, shortened the 66 words of the Lord's Prayer into 4 concepts. Did want to ask about that. What did you think of those 4 moves? The first move being orient yourself to God and the whole mystery that is God, that connects you to all of humanity, as the parent image does. Secondly, to
is your desire what God
your
desires?
your desire, getting your desire in line, so that my will is God's will, that God's will is done on earth, and I'm doing it. That second, and then the third one was our needs. We have the right to raise needs for food or for shelter or for forgiveness. But then, the fourth one being preparing ourselves to re-enter the public world, where we're going to need some help not to be led into trials, temptations, and to be delivered from evil. So 4 very quick clip points to cover the moves of a prayer. That's the model. Again, with either of you, what struck you in that 4-fold model?
All of the language, and that was one of them, but there were several, where the image of God in heaven and where the rewards are going to be sort of forced, probably in an appropriate way for that context, a kind of separation that I tend to try to read as things about myself. If the business of going into the closet is, I would rather think of that as in terms of focusing on myself instead of thinking of anything outside. Because I think even beneath the question of authenticity, beneath even that is the idea of you begin with yourself and don't externalize this. In other words, don't, the way a popular writer thinker that I'm talking about says, he talks about cleaning up your room, or don't go out and try to fix the world until you've gotten yourself together. So it's not a question of being inauthentic or authentic so much as the real reality where the aliveness happens. And what I want you to understand, and what the closet about and what God is about, is you realizing that it isn't going out and fixing the world or other people. It's starting with yourself. And by the way, one of the ways that I support that is that there's an inconsistency in the business of fasting. He actually proposes putting on a mask. The Wailing Wall and the ashes, and I suppose a lot of appropriate human suffering, religious grieving, is true and has real roots. And if you're fasting because you feel really awful, or if you lost something, or it's part of a religious thing and you're getting into it, for him to say, now don't show that, and put on a happy face, isn't he saying put on a mask? I mean, if someone, wouldn't it have been better if authenticity was the thing for him to say, look, whatever you feel, just be that. If you're sad, be sad. If you're happy, be happy. But don't, if you're really sad and that's the reason you're fasting, don't wash your face and put on a hat and don't let anyone know. That seems to be, what's the difference between that and the other kind of hypocrisy?
Yes, if putting on a happy face is, well, I think there are some churches where your sense is you project that all is well with you, that you're saved, that you're happy, your family is in good shape, but the reality of what was going on before you got there or the reality that go on during your work week is just not, don't bring that up. Right. If that's what we're talking about, then that's hypocrisy. It's putting on a false face that happens to be happy or good or smiley, right, as opposed to being authentic.
That's why I thought I needed to look underneath the authenticity. There's something even beneath that. Because he doesn't always say be authentic, you know, like.
But see, I think he is saying be authentic. If you are fasting to be seen by others,
right,
he says while you are fasting, they don't need to know you're fasting. Because it's, in fact, the phrase that Brian McLaren uses, he says, instead of every time your stomach growls, you should say, this is, I hunger for you, O God. Every time I feel the need to be filled, because I feel empty, I want to be filled by you and your spirit. He says, turn that into just you feeling and yourself. It's not about your projecting of a rite or a ritual or a discipline, right, to the people.
But if you do feel like wearing sackcloth and ashes, then that's what you should do. If that's part of the grieving process.
He's not saying don't do it.
All right.
I don't hear him say, now maybe you hear him saying don't do it. I hear him saying, don't project, don't put on sackcloth and ashes when you don't feel that you're mortal, that you feel like you're crushed. But if you are Job and you just lost your family, you lost your health and lost everything, you're sitting there in sackcloth and ashes in the rubble of your life, that's authentic. And in Job, when his friends came and sat with him for 7 days in that condition, that was authentic. When they sat with him and shared it with him.
Yeah, Jesus himself separated himself from the group in order to pray. Mm-hmm. They knew what he was doing. He witnessed that. He witnessed that I need to get away in order to do this privately. But even saying that, I'm going to go over here and do this privately, is giving up. He's telling what he's doing.
Yeah. And it's maybe a model. Of course, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, you stay here and pray. Watch with me and pray that you not lead into. So he's expecting, you guys are going to be praying. I'm going over there and praying because my heart is breaking nearly to death. Mm-hmm. So he comes back, they're sleeping, he wakes them. Could you not stay awake with me and pray that you not fall into temptation? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And he goes the second time and prays the same words.
He was sweating blood.
Yeah. So he was authentic in his prayer life, and he told them, I'm praying, and you guys should be praying too.
And you wouldn't ask him to wash his face and
well, that's right. Don't be inappropriate and say Jesus didn't go into the Garden of Gethsemane to show the world that he could sweat blood. He didn't go there to show, no. Once you start doing that, then it becomes a posture, it becomes a projecting of something false. He really was in anguished prayer, and he wasn't sure his prayer was going to be answered. If it be possible, let this happen, but if not, let your will be done. If it is possible.
The four parts of that prayer that he gives, I just looked again now. There's just no praise involved in that. So he does, from the pain angle, almost to all of it. What's wrong with you? Yeah. There's nothing. Well, there's
Thanksgiving and praise.
Yeah, that's a prayer too. You can petition, which is, I really need food today. Or you can say, all praise to you, Lord. You lift my feet like the feet of a deer, and I climb the heights. There's always praise somewhere. In fact, I forget who it is that says, if you cannot think of another word to pray, thank you would be enough.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you would be enough. That's all you'd have to say.
It may be that one could say in the Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, that focusing on God, perhaps that's where the Hallel would come in. That's where some praise could come in. Your name is hallowed. You are enormous. You parent me, and if you're my parent, so are these my siblings. you give us this world, thank you for it could be in that piece. He doesn't, but you're right, he doesn't use the word thank you or praise.
Yeah.
He does focus though on God first, and once you have a sense of God's enormity, God's
And
presence.
maybe that is that first one where he says, orient yourself.
Orient yourself to God and all that God provides, which is everything, the next breath we take. And then the second one, once you've got that, then say, okay, your will is for the good. Your will is for the flourishing of all. Mine is for me and my kind and somebody like me. But if I orient my deepest desire to your desire, suddenly these other needs become, I care about them too. So the second one, thy will be done as in my will, or as in heaven. And third, then you ask for yourself and others. The need for forgiveness, the need for food, the daily bread. And then lastly, that strengthen me as I now return to the world that has not been praying with me, who is out there and could throw some temptations, tests, and trials my way, and may even have some evil intent.
Is it okay if I take it one more?
Sure.
This reminded me, because I do the labyrinth so much, and I've done it outdoors in big fields, and I've done it all different places, in the city, on a mat here. But the thing that the 4-part reminded me of the 3-part of the labyrinth, which is you prepare yourself to enter. You want to get rid of everything that seems weighing you down. So on the way in, you just say, just empty me, empty me, empty me. You get to the middle, and that's where you listen for God's voice or the Spirit to move you in some way. Because I've never heard God's voice, but I have felt the Spirit move me. The 3rd part is entering the world again. You have to go back out there. You can't stay in the labyrinth. And the labyrinth is not a maze, so you can't get lost in there. There's one way in, the center, and one way out, same way. And so the 3-part thing really, or 4-part reminded me of the 3-part of the labyrinth. It's saying about the same thing. But that emptying before you go in, I think, is key. And then listening, and then preparing yourself to go back out for the onslaught for the next part.
And that's a personal spiritual discipline you could do even if other people are walking the labyrinth right beside you and in front of you and around you. It's still an individual experience that you are having in your spirit, in your secret life, as opposed to the people, oh, come, let's watch us do the labyrinth together.
Yeah, in fact, you're not allowed to talk while you're doing that, but you can do.
But very much introspective as opposed to etro.
Was the part about who God will forgive if you do or don't forgive others, was that part of this message?
It's in Matthew's version. The Lord's Prayer is given, and then there's that caveat right afterwards for if you don't forgive, then God won't forgive you.
Because I find that very difficult. I mean, if I'm, could I use that same criteria with the people I'm supposed to forgive? In other words, is there an implicit clause that says, you know, you've got to forgive people, unless, of course, they don't forgive you or they don't forgive someone else. This idea that God won't forgive me if I don't forgive others, I thought the idea was that he was going to teach us about forgiveness in an unconditional way, and that kind of criteria, or the person has to deserve it, or working for it, or meriting it, seems so, that's very troubling for me. I don't know how to handle that. It certainly is not a plan that I should apply to other people. I'll forgive you, but no, maybe I shouldn't, because I saw that you didn't forgive someone else, or you didn't forgive me.
If you're looking for an excuse not to forgive, you just stumble across something you can manipulate to do that. So if it's in there and it makes you stumble, I'm glad it made you stumble, and not say, oh, this gives me an excuse. Because it was not intended to be an excuse.
Right, so that's what I need help about.
I think, well, I'm no expert on it, but I have to say, in Matthew's gospel, you'll find that after the Lord's Prayer. Because Matthew has an audience to whom he is speaking, to whom the idea that you're forgiven is already hard enough, because only God forgives. He already ran through that discussion. So, first of all, to forgive, and then to have to forgive, and Jesus will say in other positions, 7 times, 70 times, 70 times, 7 times, 490 times before you can even stop keeping count. So there's places where Jesus is trying to be much more effusive and prodigal with forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Matthew's audience when this Sermon on the Mount is being articulated, they say, well, there has to be a way in which they earn it or they deserve it. You can't just forgive people, period.
Right.
So I think it's in there because of the people to whom that was being said needed it to ameliorate some of the pressure that they were under.
So you think Matthew was saying, I thought it was as you forgive.
Yeah, it's just that he's not raising the question in that part of it where it says, judge not, that you need be not judged, for the judgment you judge is the judgment will be used against you. But that sort of reciprocal, if you do it here, that was what will come back to you. That was very much within the Jewish understanding that what we do will come back to you. If you do good, good will come back to you. So in this case, that little bit of forgiveness thing got a piece of that in there, a little whiff of it in there. And if somebody takes that whiff of something that is not in the flow, but takes that whiff and says, okay, now I've smelled the stink of the whole thing, and I'm going to dismiss all the rest of the stuff that forces me to forgive because there was this little half of a caveat in a half of a sentence after the Lord's Prayer. So I think that's why it's there, is to soften the demand to forgive.
But it is a command.
I know it is. To me, it doesn't soften it. But I heard
But
you
it's
say
an impossible
you could.
command.
You could.
How would you ever know, because we don't know ourselves, we hardly know anything about ourselves. How would you know if you had adequately forgiven somebody else? I mean, what does that even
Well,
mean?
only you would know.
Well,
Is your heart still hardened?
Okay, only I would know,
Yeah.
and I don't. I don't know what forgiveness is like, and I have no way of God knows, and if He's watching me, you see the problem. Is God holding me to some kind of standard, and He's not going to forgive me if I don't somehow do something that I have no idea how to do, and He built me this way, and I can't do it, and maybe in some instances you shouldn't forgive.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think there is.
Actually, I don't have any of the struggle that you're having, so I'm having a hard time understanding what the problem is.
There is a moment, at least in one of the things I've been running into. There's a well-known grieving process where you experience the thing that's happened to you, and then and so on, and you let yourself feel the anger, and then at the end you forgive. But if God catches me in the middle of that process, where for solid, good, healthy psychological reasons, I'm not suppressing the pain and the anger and the feeling of betrayal, but I'm actually allowing it and feeling it in order to get through it to the forgiveness. Is that wrong?
No, it's not.
Okay,
it's the
good.
process.
Right.
That's why it's written about. Everyone has that process. I think if you tried to go to forgiveness as the first step of the grieving process, you'd be doing this thing here. You'd
Right.
be wearing a mask.
Good.
And it'd be false.
Right.
There's authenticity has denial. That didn't happen. That car accident didn't happen. They're not gone. They're still here. Oh, they got the gone. Well, God, could we make it so it wasn't so icy out there? Could the train be a little bit slower? Could something? And we bargain. And then after we've bargained and said, well, I
Right.
can't change that. Well, I'm just depressed as all
Denial.
get out.
I skipped denial.
I know,
Yeah, that's
but
right.
I did. I put it back in for
Right,
you.
that's
So
right.
you got denial, you got bargaining, you got depression, you got anger, you got the
Anger.
roller coaster. You're madder than mad. God, why'd you do this? It's all on you. So,
And that's good and healthy. You got to go through those steps.
It is. Those are. So if you say that process, who gave us that?
Right.
Our own being has it. So I would say God is in there. God is going
That's
through
what
the
I'm
denial.
saying.
God, okay, well I don't see.
No, I
I don't
didn't
see
mean
what the
it-
problem
But
is.
he's saying, well, no,
Okay.
the one part that's.
But there's a lot of
still-
non-forgiveness along the way.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
if God waits till he gets to the end and he finally graduates to forgiveness,
Yeah.
he wonders, all that other time I'm not forgiven? I don't believe that, because
I
I
don't
think
believe
that God is.
Because it's a grace. Forgiveness
Yeah.
is a grace, and God forgives you before you even ask for it.
Yeah.
Well, that's where I came into this discussion, but then it says so clearly, and He will not forgive you if you're not forgiving to other people. I mean, it just.
I think it is underlining for his audience
Okay.
the need. They actually have to do this thing, because otherwise it's like, well, I can pray for forgiveness, and then it's on God to forgive or not forgive, and I don't have to forgive.
I think Jesus uses this kind of hyperbole, overstatement to get people thinking about it. For example, when he says
I do too.
2 or 3 times, they have the reward, you use the word irony.
Mhm.
He has to be being ironic, because I think what he's really saying, look, that's not really a reward, or if it is a reward, it's a reward you don't want. he's using there's a message under, or I'll just ask you, what is the reward that someone who's showing off gets? Isn't it a anti-reward and a non-reward?
It is from the group to whom they are playing. It is, they go, oh, that person really has wonderful, golden fair
And
hair.
from Jesus' point of view,
language.
that's the opposite of reward. That's actually,
Right.
okay. So he's being somewhat ironic.
Yeah, he's saying they're getting the reward they're looking for. They think they're going to be rewarded by God. See, they're doing it thinking God will watch this and God will reward me. So you've already gotten your reward, and that is people watching you.
He
People
said that with a little bit of a smirk.
No, well,
Oh, sorry,
yeah, I
I
said,
mean-
well, yeah, a smile. Jesus had a smile most of the time. He was very witty. So one of the things.
Witty, I should have
Well, it
said
is, yeah.
right, okay.
I mean, you can call it irony, you can call it sarcasm, and there's a lot of different kinds of it. But he was very quick, and he says, you are playing to the audience, and you're getting your reward from that audience. Now, they didn't throw money at you like they would if you're playing a guitar on the street or something. They just threw their admiration at you. They just threw their accolades. They applauded. Wow, that was great. And you walk away knowing they think of you as something. That's your reward. God looks at it and says, I knew all that before you said it. It didn't have to take that long. Too many words. Cut out a few. Just go in your room. Talk to God directly from your heart. Because that's where God is listening, to your heart. And I think the heart was getting paid by the audience, as opposed to any authentic aliveness, any authentic gain or reward in their spirit. I think that's what Jesus is saying. At least that's how I would
And
read it.
communion's one of those, sometimes we don't stress that. Communion is to have reconciliation, you to come to that table with no resentment. Now, how hard is that?
Impossible.
Well, not impossible.
For me, it is.
Well, I'm sure I carry some things yet, but do you feel like it gets in your way sometimes? Because that's what was getting in my way, is that I was carrying some resentment. And when I had a conversion experience, I had first the knowledge that I was forgiven. For the first time, I had heard that a million times, but until I heard it in my heart, that I was forgiven for everything, yeah, for everything, then it was almost instantaneous. I forgave.
Well, that's how
It happened to me.
That's how it works for me. That's what I'm holding on to. If it doesn't work for that, it doesn't work at all. In other words, if I can experience forgiveness, that will teach it to me and open it up. But for me, for someone to say, hey, look, if you don't forgive, don't learn somehow to forgive all these other people, God isn't going to forgive you. It is discouraging.
Well, how about if it's a method, like that forgiveness is freely given, I think it says somewhere in here, where forgiveness is freely received and freely given. So you're saying if I could freely receive it, I could freely give it probably. Is that, you don't believe?
It just sounds like it's impossible. 70 times 7 is Jesus pointing out to
You never
them.
give up forgiveness.
Don't keep count. Let it go.
You
Forgiveness,
can't-
let it go.
An enemy is precisely the person you do not love. So when he says love your enemy, it's a paradox, and it's something that
I think we're just going to have to,
Yeah, okay.
we do have to end. I think one of the issues at stake in this entire chapter is what do we do for public performance, for public show, so others see what we're doing, and what do we do because it's us? If we're forgiving in order for other people to think something of us, then we're not really forgiving. We're playing games. And I think the real issue, prayer, fasting, and giving alms, are temptations to do it in public for public applause, as opposed to doing it because these are disciplines that enrich our spirit and help us express to the world who we are.
Right.
And so let's be authentic. To me, that's the key thing. Be authentic, drop the mask, be real,
right.
And keep struggling.
and keep struggling, because it is. Every step is a struggle and a process. Well, thanks for being here for our secret life, the public and private dilemma.